All right, welcome to Steeler Country. I am Tony Serino. Today on the show, we're doing our season expectations. What do we think for this season? How are us Steeler fans feeling about the 2022 Pittsburgh Steelers? So as the season starts tonight. I mean, I'm recording this on Thursday night, probably 3 hours before the games. The Bills and Rams kick off the season tonight, but the Steelers season obviously starts on Sunday. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what are the expectations for this Pittsburgh Steelers team in 2022. Actually, before I say that, I do want to know your thoughts. So leave your thoughts in chat here if you're watching live. If you're watching this after the fact, you can leave a comment here on the channel. And also, if you'd rather see this, if you're listening to this in audio format and you'd rather have this as a live show, you can check me out here on YouTube, Steeler Country with Tony Serino, doing this live weeknights around 5:30 Eastern time. All right, so let's get into it. Expectations for the 2022 season for the Steelers. The fun part about this season for me and why I'm so excited about the Steelers in 2022, I don't really have expectations for this team this year. Quite honestly, what are the expectations for them? That if you listen to the national media, right? If you listen to the national media talk about the Steelers this year, I mean, they're a fourth place team, right? I mean, Vegas has them at 7.5 wins. That's the lowest win total of anyone in the AFC North. Are they expected to make the playoffs? No. I think Mike Florio may be the only guy out there I've seen who has a team anywhere close to sniffing the playoffs, quite honestly. This is supposed to be a bottoming out period. If you listen to my other show that I do here on YouTube, AFC North Talk, I think everyone's been waiting for this. The rest of the division has been waiting for this moment, right? This is the moment when Ben Roethlisberger retires. The Steelers are past their Hall of Fame quarterback, and now, as my co-hosts love to tell me on that show, you get to see how the other half lives, right? We Steeler fans are we're a bit spoiled, right? I mean, look, 20 years, 18 years without a losing season, the third longest streak in NFL history. We are a little bit spoiled. Sure, certainly. But I didn't think I would be this excited about a Steeler team in a post Ben Roethlisberger era. And I think some of that does come from the fact that there isn't the weight of expectation on this football team. I'm not sitting here at the beginning of September dreaming about games in that are going to be played in January and February, because that's really what this team, because back in the Ben Roethlisberger era during the peak there, and that's what it was about, right? Week 1 was cute, but at the end of the day, it was about accumulating wins because that team was really expected to be a playoff contender in January and into February. This Steeler team, I mean, I'm hyped about Sunday. I'm ready to watch this Steeler team shock the world, because really, when you consider where they are in the division, the Bengals were in the Super Bowl a year ago, and the Ravens feel like, hey, they were on their way to a division title before Lamar got hurt last year, and they have all these expectations, right? The weight of expectation for everyone around the Steelers, and then here come the little old Steelers now, the most winning franchise in NFL history, and it's like, oh, no one considers. I love the fact that the Steelers are so under the radar this year, and they should be. I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to play like the underdog of, why is no one talking about the Steelers? I get it. It's a post Ben Roethlisberger era. But as we've seen, I think another thing about the excitement and the lack of expectation comes from the fact that 2019, if 2019 and 2020 and 2021 taught us anything as Steeler fans, it's that when you start counting this team out, that's really when they're at their best. The 2019 season, how many of us counted out that team when Ben Roethlisberger went down? Ben Roethlisberger goes down in week 2. That team is already 0-2. I think a lot of us Steelers fans said, all right, well, write this season off. There is no chance this team's going to be even remotely competitive for the rest of the season. And we're done. And same thing with last year. Now, you look at that team a year ago, they were 1-3 to start the year? And how many of us Steelers fans said a year ago, all right, yep, nah, Ben's a little bit washed, and this is just not going to be a fun end of the season. And in both cases, those teams kind of bounced back and were competitive down the stretch. Last year's team obviously did make the playoffs. The 2019 team came, a half game or a game out of making the playoffs that year. Yeah, I love the idea that let's enter a season where people are just immediately counting the Steelers out. Yes, that is what I want my Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, it goes back to this idea of Mike Tomlin, and this Mike Tomlin has shown over the past 3 seasons that he can turn what should be a lost cause, what should be a bad football team, into a winner. Last year's team, I said this so many times last year. Last year's team wasn't good. I didn't the play on the field was not indicative of the record. Or I should say the record was not indicative of the play on the field. The record was 9-7-1. The play on the field was far less. And so I think we all look at this team, we all as fans look at this team and say, look, they upgraded a lot of different areas. They might have even upgraded at quarterback when you consider that Ben last year had all the limitations that he had. But we'll get to that in a second. I think we do as fans have one expectation, right? We have one expectation as fans for this 2022 season, and that is that on the defensive side of the ball, this should be a top 5 unit. Right? This should be a top 5 unit defensively. They've invested so heavily here. We talk about the big contracts they just gave out to TJ and Minka over the past 2 seasons. But this is where really a lot of the draft capital had gone prior to the last 2 seasons. This is where all the star talent is. When we talk about the kind of blue chip players that you need to build a Super Bowl roster, those kind of top guys at their position, those are all on the defensive side for the Steelers. And you look at a team last year, people outside of us fans, right? When I talk about this kind of top 5 defense thing on AFC North Talk, I get a lot of side eye from the coast. We're like, really? You think they're going right back to top 5? But I think consider it this way. I think the reason why we want this, we think this can be a top 5 defense again, is that they were back in 2020 and 2019, right? This is, the 2021 road bump was just that, right? A road bump in between what was a top 5 defense for 2 years running. And when you look back at last season and why this defense fell off, and they fell off pretty far. I mean, let's call them a top 3 defense in 2019 and 2020. I mean, they didn't just fall from being a top 3 to top 5 or top 10. I mean, they were probably like a top 15-ish defense a year ago when you consider how poor they were, especially in the running game. But there's clear reasons for why that happened. I mean, it didn't just happen randomly, right? This wasn't just kind of weird variance because, hey, you can't count on defense on a year-to-year basis. I mean, this was legitimate, tangible losses of personnel that led to this team falling off. You think about losing, obviously, Stephon Tuitt did not play a single down last year, as disruptive as he was on the interior of that defensive line, and putting him alongside Cam Hayward and what that represented on a game-to-game basis for those opposing offensive lines, and not having him, and not having him, kind of late in the process too. Right? I mean, this was a situation where they kept talking about throughout camp, and he might come back. He maybe he does, and he never did. You think about the loss of Bud Dupree a year ago. Now the Steelers had planned for that one with the drafting of Alex Highsmith, but regardless, I mean, Bud Dupree was a borderline 10 sack a year type player, and he was a perfect complement on the edge to what TJ Watt represented on the other side. Bud had finally learned to go speed to power, and they replaced that with a second-year player in Alex Highsmith. You think about the loss of Mike Hilton at the slot position. I mean, Mike Hilton, probably the best slot corner in the game, and they replaced that with what? Arthur Mollett, pushing Cam Sutton to the inside. And then we talk about corner. They lost, going into last season, they lost Steven Nelson. Steven Nelson was a very underrated player here in Pittsburgh. I mean, I know not a lot of Steelers fans didn't love him as a corner, but boy, when you consider some of the problems they had, especially early on last season, you talk about, my boy James Pierre, wouldn't you rather had Steven Nelson in those cases? And I think the other problem with last year is not only did they lose all those guys, and the other one we should talk about, not talked about enough, especially when we talk about the diminished run defense a year ago. The loss of Vince Williams, I think, loomed large over last season. That was another late retirement. He retired like right at the start of training camp. I think he knew he was probably going to end up in a position battle and potentially a rotation type place, and he didn't want to be there. And so he retired right before the start of training camp. That's huge. That was huge for that run defense. You think about all those losses that defense had, but where could they make acquisitions? I mean, they really didn't, right? They traded for Joe Schobert late in the process, but at corner, they didn't really make any big acquisitions. They got Ahkello Witherspoon, who ended up being a nice asset for them later on. But at the end of the day, it was just kind of, okay, we lost all these pieces, and now guys at the bottom of the depth chart, you just slot up a set. And that's really how the Steelers attacked it defensively. So it made a lot of sense. When you lose all this talent defensively, yeah, that's going to hurt you a little bit. And it did. But I think when you look at this season, okay, they've addressed a lot of these things. I mean, you look at the additions on this defense. They add Levi Wallace, who's essentially going to be the third corner. We talked about him already. He's going to be, we talk about the nickel sets, those sub-package football. When an extra DB is coming on the field, that extra DB will be Levi Wallace. Cam Sutton, who will play outside corner in those base sets, will kick inside to the slot, and Levi Wallace will be your outside corner. Levi Wallace, by the way, is going to be a kind of sub-package player for the Steelers, where he had been a 5-year starter previously with the Buffalo Bills. A Buffalo Bill defense, by the way, the Buffalo Bill secondary a year ago, that was one of the best in the National Football League. And Levi Wallace comes in now to be this kind of third corner on the Steelers. Larry Ogunjobi comes in to the defensive line in what would have been Stephon Tuitt's role if he had elected to come back. Ogunjobi, I think, was a huge signing late in the process because he really does, I think, solidify maybe not the run defense, and we'll see how he does it from a run defense perspective. But boy, from a pass rushing perspective, you talk about this team's ability to get pressure with only 4 players. Larry Ogunjobi, alongside Cam Hayward, alongside TJ Watt, alongside Alex Highsmith, that's a formidable foursome there that can get pressure without having to do the kind of exotic blitzes that previous defensive coordinator Keith Butler loved to do so much. In a world where it is so advantageous to be able to rush just 4 players and get pressure, that's a great unit. Now, again, the run defense, it remains to be seen as far as Ogunjobi's abilities there. But I think as a pass rusher, he's going to be far better than what the Steelers were trotting out there last year with guys like Chris Wormley. And then, of course, at the linebacker spot, I've talked about this all off season. If you listen to any other show I've done here on the channel, you've heard me talk about Myles Jack and what he represented the linebacker spot. Because this is like a savior situation for the Steelers. This was a glaring hole for the Steelers a year ago. And this year, they have a player in Myles Jack who at one point in his career was a star. I mean, this was maybe not a blue chip player, but like, what's the other red chip player? You know what I mean? Like, okay, it wasn't a top guy at his position, but boy, he was close and getting there. And the Steelers don't need him to be a true blue chip player at that linebacker position. If he can end up being, at the end of the day, the 4th best player on this Steeler defense, that's perfectly fine. They don't need him to rise to the level of a Minka or a Cam or a TJ. That would be great if he did. But at the end of the day, they needed to solidify that position. I think they have with a guy like Myles Jack. And then there's a couple other guys that are kind of added to this defense. They aren't real additions, but they kind of are when you look at the snap counts, right? First of all, let's talk about Tyson Alualu. Tyson Alualu comes in after having sat out all of 2021 with an injury. He left in week 2? He was hurt. And you go back and look at the run defense splits. This started, by the way, back in 2020. Look at the splits before and after in 2020. That run defense, when Alualu had that knee injury, before and after, it is night and day. And it has been night and day, really. This run defense has been night and day since before and after Tyson Alualu got out of the lineup. And last year, obviously, it fell off a cliff, not just because of Alualu. There were other aspects there, but yeah, Alualu is a huge part of that. And so the more the Steelers can keep Alualu on the field, and he's 35 years old, so I don't know about playing time, but I think he is going to be a big asset, especially in those base downs. Where it was so easy to run up the middle on this team a year ago. I think the teams are going to want to try and test the edge. Now, again, it wasn't like the Steelers were greater on the edge last year anyway. But regardless, I think Alualu is a huge asset to this team in the middle of that defense if he can stay healthy. And the other guy that I know Steeler fans are talking about, but maybe we're not hearing enough about from the kind of national media or from the outside looking in. I think there's the Steelers found someone here in Ahkello Witherspoon. I think Ahkello Witherspoon as being the kind of CB1 type on this team. He's the only corner the Steelers really have with that size, speed that you'd want out of a CB1 type. But the splits he had last year, you look at the numbers he put up there last year. I mean, we're talking about one of the best corner performances over a 6-game span that we saw in the National Football League, bar anyone. I mean, his numbers last year were of the shutdown variety. Now, I don't know that he's going to be a true shutdown corner for this team, but the Steelers don't necessarily need him to be that. There'll be some times this Sunday where they would certainly like him to be a kind of island corner where they can just say, hey, we need you to shut down this side of the field so we can roll coverage the other way. Certainly that would be advantageous, but I don't think that's a requirement for this defense to get back to being a top 5 defense. They just need Ahkello Witherspoon to be a solid player alongside Cam on the other side. And then, of course, Levi, when he comes in, it was a real problem for this team a year ago. They didn't have, 2 solid outside corners that they could use, especially in those nickel and dime sets. And so you look at that, you look at those 5 additions there that we just talked about, right? Levi Wallace at the cornerback position, Larry Ogunjobi on that defensive line, Miles Jack at the inside linebacker spot, Akilla Witherspoon at corner, and Tyson Alualu on that defensive line. But again, we're talking about addressing all the big problems that this team had a year ago. That defensive line last year, was stopping nobody, especially in the running game. And then that linebacking core, everybody's already talked about Devin Bush and how poor his play was a year ago. But even Joe Schobert, I mean, again, the problem for the Steelers were a year ago is that they wanted to have the kind of playmaker type be a Devin Bush and Schobert kind of, clean up here and there and be a better in pass defense. But, it was a kind of trickle down effect of the D line's not any good. You don't really have a guy who's going to be shedding and making plays in the backfield. That's not who Joe Schobert is going to be as a football player, and neither is Devin Bush. And so it kind of just trickled down from there, where it's like, Minka's got to come up and make the majority of tackles on plays. This year, you solidify the defensive line with Ogunjobi and Alualu. And then I don't know that they solidify the linebacking core necessarily, because you still have a liability potentially in Devin Bush, but at least you have a guy in Miles Jack who you can trust is not just going to be a solid player. I think he's going to be, in some ways, a playmaking type, in that I trust his ability to keep guards off of him, to shed and get into the backfield and make some plays there. Something the Steelers just did not have whatsoever at that position. And then at corner, look, it is always funny to me when I hear people talk about the Steeler defense, that they talk about the corner room as if it's this massive weakness for this team compared to where it was a year ago. And I just have to sit and laugh. The defense last year fell off. The majority of that fall off, though, was in the run defense. From a pass defense perspective, maybe they weren't elite, but they certainly weren't bad. I believe they were a top 10 pass defense if you look at Football Outsiders and their DVOA. And I think if you look at EPA per just a raw EPA per play, I believe they were a top 10 pass defense as well. And so you're talking about upgrading that unit. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to sit here and say that adding Levi Wallace and adding Akilla Witherspoon or making Akilla Witherspoon a starting player on this defense, I don't think anyone's going to sit here and say that that's a downgrade from where the Steelers were. Even though, yes, they did lose Joe Hayden, I don't think it's a downgrade whatsoever. As I said all camp long, I am very excited for what this defense could be. Certainly, everything I saw at camp leads me to believe that this defense is going to be far better than it was a season ago. Certainly, it'll be as disruptive as ever from a pass rushing perspective. I mean, TJ Watt, again, I'll go back to my favorite thing that happened at camp. TJ Watt was so good at training camp that a reporter actually asked Mike Tomlin in a press conference during training camp, do you have to tell TJ to back it off a little bit so that this offense can actually run some plays? Think about how absurd that is. Do you have to tell TJ Watt to back it off so that the offense can actually do something? That's how disruptive TJ was. I mean, I think he's going to pick up right where he left off a year ago. The only question mark for me from a pass rushing perspective, quite honestly, is Alex Highsmith. And the reason why I don't want to say low expectations for Alex Highsmith, but I certainly, it's a question mark for me, is because one of the big storylines at the beginning of camp was how good Dan Moore looked. Look at how it was something that I said. It was written and said in other places as well. And now we know, okay, Dan Moore certainly did not improve year over year. I mean, if preseason is any indication, Dan Moore maybe wasn't exactly having a great camp. Maybe he just wasn't going up against, that great of opponent in practice. Now, okay, Highsmith got hurt, and the majority of the time he was going up against guys like Hamilcar and Tuska and Delonte Scott and guys who didn't end up making the roster. But there was that time where Highsmith was healthy. And Highsmith was not out there dominating Dan Moore on a play-to-play basis. And that does worry me a little bit. I thought this was a year, Highsmith didn't have a bad year last year, but he certainly didn't have the breakout year that a lot of us expected him to. This is a guy with a great get-off. Everyone saw that, how quick he was off the ball. He's your classic speed rusher. Everyone saw that from him back in 2020 when he was kind of the third guy, the first off the bench at that edge rush spot. And I think last year, a lot of it was, hey, look, he's going to be in so many advantageous positions. You're talking about the defensive line. He's playing alongside TJ. Or he's never going to get double teamed. And he didn't have a bad year. I think he ends the year with like 6.5 sacks, something like that, and 38 pressure, something like that. And it certainly wasn't a bad year for Alex Highsmith, but it wasn't the year we all expected. And I think this year, every Steelers fan is kind of going in like, all right, we've seen from Highsmith what he could be, right? We've seen the potential that he has if he can put it all together. I guess, for me, I'm kind of reevaluating now based on the limited sample set I saw in camp, and kind of, you almost have to kind of extrapolate out his performance against Dan Moore versus other players we've seen against Dan Moore and say, oh, well, it's the one, like I said, I'm not trying to be super negative here about Alex Highsmith. It's a small sample size. It's just a question mark I have on this defense. But otherwise, I look around. I've been really impressed with what I've seen from Terrell Edmunds. And I know he's a fifth, sixth-year player. It really doesn't matter what he's doing in August at this point. It really matters what he's doing on game days. But, when I look around this defense, where do I really have the big questions? And the big questions are going to come like in a game like Sunday. Is this secondary, is this team built to beat a team as loaded as the Cincinnati Bengals are at the wide receiver position, right? Does this corner room have enough talent in it to shut that down? Well, no, obviously not. But who does? Who exactly amongst us has a corner room that can do that? Obviously, the way to beat Joe Burrow, as we've seen in over time, is get pressure. There are 3 good receivers out there, but if you don't have time to see them, you're fine. You'll be okay. So I think the one expectation I have about this team in 22 is that I think this defense is going to go back to being top 5. And then the question comes down to, what is this offense? But again, the reason why I can't get super upset about this, right? And if this offense isn't markedly better than it was a year ago, it's post-Ben. It's supposed to be bad, right? Again, we're supposed to, as Steeler fans, be in this kind of woe is me, oh no, we're in search for a quarterback and everything's going to suck, and we're going to be a losing team, we're going to finish 4th in the division. Again, I just don't feel that way. I don't feel that way about this team. Look, am I thrilled to watch this offense on Sunday? Am I super excited about what could happen? I mean, I'm not super thrilled because I've seen this offensive line last year and I've seen what they represented in preseason play. But even as I said after that Lions game, the thing I keep coming back to about this offensive line is, like, are we sure it's going to be all bad? I know that is the narrative right now because of how bad it was a year ago. But really, if you just ignore the fact, let's ignore for the fact that, like, Dan Moore is a super liability on the left side. And then that you can't take that away. I understand, like, yeah, they have a real problem at left tackle. We can't ignore that. But for the sake of this argument, let's ignore that for a second. Like, where else on this line do you really feel badly, where it's like, yo, it's horrendous? Because prior to the first depth chart coming out and seeing that Dotson's going to start, we would have all said, well, Kendrick Green's horrific. Kendrick Green can't play. Yeah, I agree, but he's not going to start. So we're in a situation where Kendrick Green, as long as Dotson stays healthy, and I know that's another asterisk we got to put out there, but like, Dotson's starting at left guard. I don't know that Mason Cole's did anything in preseason to make you think like, oh my goodness, this guy can't play. I mean, again, not going to be a star at the position, but what is the expectation for this offensive line? Are we expecting them to be a top 10 unit? Because no, they're not going to be a top 10 unit. Mason Cole's not going to be a top 10 center. Agreed. But I don't think that's my expectation. Or, what I'm hoping for, not even an expectation. My biggest hope for this team is that they can go from what they were last year, probably one of the worst offensive lines in the league last year, right? I would hope that unit could go from being one of the worst to closer to middle of the pack, right? If you want to call them 30th a year ago, the hope would be that you can at least get that up to 20 this year. Now, let's keep going through here because James Daniels was a big problem in preseason games number 1 and 2. I agree, but that tape he put out there against the Lions was very impressive. And here's a veteran player who's put good tape out there. All right, so am I going to buy this kind of 2-game sample size of, oh, he went to Pittsburgh and all of a sudden he forgot how to play football? Or is it, hey, communication issues? He's got to figure out what the coach staff wants from him, and he's starting to put that together, right? Was that an arrow pointing up type situation? And then Chooks on the right side. I know he's hurt right now. We'll talk about the preview and everything and this Sunday's game, but I'm talking about Chooks not just for Sunday, but in the long term. We know what Chooks is. Chooks is just a guy. Chooks is fine. No one loves Chooks, but you're not out there, like, oh, Chooks can't play. We got to bench Chooks. He's not that guy. He's never been that guy. He's fine in pass protection. And yes, on running plays, he's going to annoy you because he's not the mauler. He's not aggressive. There are going to be times where he's like, are you just standing out there? Or are you going to block somebody in the run game? And yes, that is going to happen from time to time. But again, so where on this offensive line, other than Dan Moore, are we really feeling like this thing's going to be a disaster? Because I actually have had this thought since that Lions game of, I'm left tackle's hard, but this offensive line could actually surprise some people. I wouldn't be surprised this year if we're not just watching Najee get hit in the backfield, by 1 or 2 yards every single play and having to fight for his life just to get the 2 or 3 that he's capable of. I'm not going to be necessarily shocked if this, especially the right side of the offensive line, is a little bit better than what our expectations are today, where we've just watched a preseason of, poor offensive line play, but it was really isolated to a couple guys at a couple spots. I don't know what they're going to do with Dan Moore and how they're going to figure that out. I mean, again, it's a massive problem, and it's going to be a huge problem on Sunday, as we'll talk about tomorrow. But again, going back to the offensive line, I'm probably too optimistic here, but I certainly have some optimism about that offensive line and what that right side of the line can be. But then around the rest of the, talking about the rest of the offense in general, the fun part about this season for me offensively is that we get to see who the blue chippers are, right? How many of these guys? Look, everybody knows the Steelers right now are not hurting for talent at the skill positions. You got Deontay, you got Pickens, you got Claypool now moving into the slot, Pat Freiermuth at tight end, Najee Harris at running back. I think the fun part about this season is, can any of those players elevate their game to a true blue chip level? Meaning that, can they become thought of as a kind of Minka, TJ, Cam Hayward level player? The talent, I think, is there for some of these guys. Najee Harris, certainly. I've always said Deontay could be one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best wide receivers in the league if he had a quarterback that could get him the ball in more advantageous positions and not necessarily just kind of a, catch and run. Although I think Canada's going to want to do a lot more of that this season. Freiermuth, the same thing. I mean, Freiermuth could be, again, I'm not saying top 5 type players, but you know what I'm saying? Like a top-ish guy at his spot, a player that you can certainly feel like you're going to build around at the position. George Pickens, I think, is that guy right now at the wide receiver position as well. I think that's the fun part about this offense, is trying to figure out how many of these guys right now can be a blue chip player in the future for this team. Because look, this offense isn't going to be top 10 or top, it's not going to be that this year. But again, much like I talked about the offensive line, if we consider them, let's say 25th best offense in the league last year, somewhere around there probably. Well, can they get that up to top 20? Can they get up to top 15? Because if they can, by the way, if they do those two things, okay, top 5 defense, top 15 offense, that's borderlining on, sneaking into the playoffs again and doing the same old with a Mike Tomlin led team, right? Which is, you bury them and then they prove you wrong week in and week out until, oh, by the way, they happen to sneak themselves into the playoffs. And that's the fun part about this. Again, I think we all know as Steeler fans, like, yeah, it's supposed to suck. It's supposed to suck when Ben retires. It's supposed to suck to go through, finding your next quarterback. But here's the thing. Here's the other part. The part I haven't talked about yet, which is quarterback. Because the other fun part about being a Steeler fan right now is that even if the worst case scenario happens at quarterback, and Mitch is an absolute disaster. If Mitch goes out there and goes right back to like the worst we saw him in Chicago, can't read a defense, throwing interceptions, silly plays, all of that. Kenny time. That's why, and again, that's why I just, it's like, no matter how bad it gets, well, I shouldn't say no matter how bad it gets, because I guess it could always get worse. But like even the parts of this team where you really worry, you really worry about, especially with Mitch. Boy, if Mitch is bad, and we can all certainly imagine that happening, because we've seen it in Chicago. Mitch certainly, there's a reason why he didn't make it there as a starting quarterback. There's a reason why he was a backup a year ago. But even in that case, the Steelers have Kenny Pickett waiting in the wings, and I think we're all excited to see if he can continue what he did in the preseason and do that in a regular season game. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more asked of him in a regular season game. I don't think he ran against a lot of disguised coverages in the preseason. That's why everything looks so easy for him. Obviously when we get to the regular season, defenses know young quarterback, let's confuse this kid. And so, but who amongst us isn't excited to see that as well? So, generally speaking, look, I'm excited about this team. Overall, expectation wise, as far as a record, if you heard my AFC North talk, my record prediction for this Steeler team is 7-10. Again, I think that's kind of, me middling, if you know my gambling background, take kind of what is the highest possibility, what is the lowest possibility, and take somewhere in the middle, right? And then that's kind of like your, where you want to gamble. I think the Steelers probably are somewhere around a 7-win team. Now, again, does that mean I think they will be non-competitive? Just because you're a losing team doesn't mean you're non-competitive, right? Just the same way as being a winning team, which what the Steelers were last year, doesn't mean you're a good team, right? I wouldn't say that the Steelers, as a 9-win football team last year, were a good football team. They played ugly football. They happened to win games late. You look at this team this year at 7-10. I'm not saying this team's going to be bad. I think they're going to be just as competitive. The thing I worry about with this team in general is you think about Trubisky, you think about whether it's Trubisky or Pickett. The thing about Ben last year was, okay, yes, we talk about the arm and whether that was gone and his mobility and, was he washed and all that, yada, yada, right? I mean, yes, there were a lot of limitations that Ben Roethlisberger had a year ago. But the limitation he did not have is that when it was money time, when it was time to, put up or shut up, when it's go time, Ben Roethlisberger showed up in those games, pretty much every time. I mean, you even look at the games where this team was getting blown out. You're talking about that Chargers game, that Vikings game. He played well down the stretch in leading those teams to potential comeback victories in those games. And then we're not even talking about the performances that he had, against Cleveland, against Baltimore, late in those games when this team needed points late to drive them down the field to secure victory. That's what he was great at. That is vintage Ben Roethlisberger. That's what we saw from the moment he stepped out on the field. And that's how he kind of left the game was, okay, as far as everything else, it's still like first and second down, he wasn't great. But third down, Ben showed up. And that's the worry for me about this Steeler team is I still think they're going to have to play ugly football, right? If you are a defense-minded team, if you're a team led by having a great defense, well, then you're probably going to end up playing a lot of ugly football. Unless you have a great offense to go alongside of it, in which case you're going to be one of the best teams in football. Right? But when you don't have that, you're going to win by playing ugly. If this team's going to play ugly, well, ugly football involves this team at the end of games being able to win late. And the question is going to end up being whether it's Mitch or Kenny, and it's going to be Mitch to start. Are you that guy late in football games? Do I trust you? Minute to go, 2 minutes to go, you're down by 3, game is tied. Can you go down there and win a football game? And the other thing is, and Ben did this so well last year because this is the Buffalo game a year ago. This 1 year ago today, Ben didn't get enough credit in that football game for securing victory late by running that clock out, by converting and keeping drives alive late in that football game to run clock. Not enough credit given to him and that offense a year ago in their ability to do that. And again, do we trust Mitch Trubisky right now to be that guy? If I'm projecting forward, based on what I've seen already from him in Chicago, I don't know that he has that gene. I don't know that he has that kind of the gamer, whatever you want to call it, right? The it factor in those moments. Ben always had that. It's what makes him a Hall of Famer. Even when the rest of his game was diminished, that part of his game always was top. And it's the one worry I have about this team, and it's why I think this team could be 7-10 this year. Not necessarily less competitive. I mean, again, I'm not going to say this team's getting blown out on a week-to-week basis. Certainly not. It's just a question of how many of those close games a year ago were W's because this team had Ben Roethlisberger, and they turn into L's this year because they don't have Ben Roethlisberger. So that's kind of where I land on this team. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think the Steeler team is going to land in 2022. Let me know your thoughts in chat, in the comments below this video. Let's go to the chat here real quick. We'll do a little Q&A for today. George here says defensive line and Jack definitely have to stop the run, and I know they'll pressure the quarterbacks. I mean, look, fixing the run defense has been top of mind for Mike Tomlin really since this whole, since training camp started. I mean, it has been, it's everything. I mean, it really has been. It's why I think when you go back to that preseason game, the third one, why did Tomlin play that defense for so long in that game? Everyone was like, hemming and hawing. Oh, TJ got hurt, and this guy, Deontay's hurt. And why are they playing the starters so much? Offensively, it made sense why the starters were playing so much. There was a quarterback battle, but also, again, that you just want that offense to kind of get their timing down, play together. Right, the more reps for that unit, a unit that hasn't played together with Trubisky, the better. Defensively, I think a lot of fans were saying, "Hey, why is this defense playing together when, all the big pieces are the same? So what are we doing?" I think in Tomlin's mind, though, it was about fixing that run defense. He wanted them to go out there and we are going to shut down this run. The 3rd and 17, I think, bothers everybody, and it's what kind of sticks in the back of everyone's mind of like, I like a lot of the talent that they added. What happened there? But it's one play. State of the Steelers here says Highsmith had less sacks than Wormley last year. Okay. I mean, yes, that's true, but didn't they have the same number of pressures? I know I'm going to be the pressure guy here. I'm a pressure guy on AFC North, so I'll be a pressure guy. It's my brand. He did have less sacks than Wormley, although a lot of those Wormley sacks were cleanup. There's a reason why the Steelers didn't go out and try to upgrade an edge, but they definitely wanted to upgrade on the defensive line, right? So, yeah, I mean, and take nothing away from Wormley, right? I mean, I think he had a solid season. He had a lot of cleanup sacks last year. He can be a quality player for this team. But I think they have the same number of pressures. So, it's just a cleanup thing. I think from a Highsmith perspective, I mean, to state this another way, right? Yeah, Highsmith, this is one of those reasons why Highsmith was a little disappointing last year. And it's why I kind of, I am kind of giving Highsmith the side eye as we get into this season of, okay, let's see if you can become, and again, he doesn't need to be premier. I'm not going to use the word premier pass rusher, but can he become a solid enough player alongside TJ Watt, a dependable enough player alongside TJ Watt, that he can be a long-term starter for this team? Let's see. Darwin here says Mitch didn't have weapons in Chicago and took them to the playoffs twice. I mean, it's a great point. Can Mitch just kind of be game manager guy that he was in Chicago? That Chicago team made the playoffs really on the backs of that defense. And Mitch and that offense doing, enough to get them there. Now, the couple problems I have with this is that NFC back then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that was a very strong NFC back then. I know they had the Packers, but that was the end of the McCarthy era. Right? This is, Mitch Trubisky making the playoffs kind of led to Matt LaFleur, and the start of that era, right? I believe I have the timeline correct on that. But, am I going to sit here today and tell you that Mitch Trubisky can't lead the Steelers to the playoffs? No, that's why I'm so excited. I mean, again, go back to what I said at the beginning of the show. I'm hyped to watch this team because I think this possibility, it definitely exists. Shock the world, shock the AFC North, finish second in the division, win the division. If this defense goes back to where we think it can be, you're in a lot of games this year. You're in a lot of games. You can win a lot of games. And I'm not going to completely rule out this team from making the playoffs. Darwin here again says the offense will shock teams. Will shock teams because they don't know what to expect. It is an interesting part of this season, which is Matt Canada really did have a blank slate coming in, and how much different does he want it to be? I don't know that it's actually going to be that different. I mean, again, do you believe that this offense is going to be different fundamentally when it comes to its reliance or potentially over-reliance on short and quick passes? Because I still think that that's going to be a core tenet of what Matt Canada wants to do. Unless there's some new package that they didn't show at camp, they didn't show in preseason, and they're just waiting for week 1 to bring it out. And look, I'm not going to rule that out. I'm just saying, based on what I saw at camp, based on what we saw in preseason, a lot of the stuff that they're doing is similar. Now, they are certainly going to be using the middle of the field more. Trubisky is going to throw down the seams more often, right? He is going to be more willing to throw true dig routes over the middle of the field, not just little slants. I mean, all of that's going to be true. But is that going to be more of a staple, or is it still going to be, again, just trying to get the ball out quick on speed outs and things like that? I think it's probably still going to be, more similar than not. Let's put it that way. To put it in silly academic terms, more similar than not to last year is how I would say. George says, I've been predicting 11-6. 11-6 would be 2 games better than last season. I would love it. In this AFC North. I mean, we're talking about competing for a division at 11-6. We're talking about not, my whole prediction is I think the Steelers finish third in the division, and one of the other teams in the division is thinking about, like, how did we finish below a Steeler team without Ben Roethlisberger, right? It's post Ben Roethlisberger era. It's supposed to be the time where the rest of the division shines, right? I mean, you think about how the rest of the division looks at the Steelers. Joe Burrow and that Bengals team, young core, they just made it to the Super Bowl. We're plays away from winning. You think they're looking at the Steelers like they're a threat? I can tell you right now, they are not. You think about the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson, contract year, that whole thing going on. He's trying to prove that he deserves a fully guaranteed contract. It's an 8-3 football team last year with all the injuries. They're getting guys back healthy, but they were 8-3 a year ago with all the injuries. It really took Lamar going down and also playing the Steelers. I want to point that out. Steelers started the losing streak before Lamar got hurt. I want to point that out. But that was an 8-3 football team last year. They were winning in silly ways, but they were winning. And now this year they're getting healthy. They feel like they're returning back to what made this team so great during that Lamar MVP season, which is more of that ground and pound style, the 2 tight end sets and whatnot. You think Baltimore Ravens, even though they've been swept by the Steelers twice, by the way, they've been swept by the Steelers now in the last 2 years. You think they're looking at the Steelers like a real threat in this AFC North? I can tell you right now, Ravens fans are not looking at the Steelers like a threat. They are absolutely not. And then that takes to the Cleveland Browns, who are, I don't want to use the D word when it comes to how the Browns fans are thinking about this season, but they're getting close. Look, the Browns have an interesting year because they have to kind of thread the same needle the Steelers did last year, right? Which is quarterback with a bunch of limitations, defense that has to keep you in all the games, and if the opposing team scores 30, game over, right? But the difference for them is that they have to thread that needle, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Because if you can thread it at the end, we get Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson being one of the best quarterbacks in the AFC. One of the best quarterbacks in the game, really. Now, there's a question of, and I've had this discussion on AFC North Talk of, okay, you're going to get Deshaun Watson back, but you're going to get him like 11 games into a season when the team is already rolling. There's already rapport being built. And then he's just got to get inserted in after not playing football for, at that point, it will be what, 2.5 years since he's played a real down. I mean, he's got the 2 series he played or whatever in preseason. It's a weird one. But again, that Browns team, now, going back to my point, though, that Browns team, though, feels like, and I know a lot of you are going to laugh at this, but this is what I hear from Browns fans. They can win 6 or 7 games with Jacoby Brissett. 5 or 6, I think. 5, 6, 7, whatever, in that range. About 11 games of Jacoby Brissett, and they feel like they have a good enough football team to be 6-5, 7-4, or 5-6 coming out of that stretch. And then they get Watson back. Once again, I will ask you this. Do you think that team who feels like they can win 5 or 6 games or even 7 games with Jacoby Brissett and then they get Watson back looks at the Steelers with Mitch Trubisky as a threat in the AFC North? No, they do not. They do not. No one in the AFC North right now considers the Steelers a threat. They consider that this team is entering into quarterback hell. And that's what makes it so exciting for me. I go back to the original point here. When everyone else is saying the Steelers, Steelers are done. They are done. Yep. Stick a fork in them. They're out. That's when that's when Tomlin always gets his teams to play above themselves. And I have absolutely no doubt that Mike Tomlin will have this team playing above itself. I have no doubt this team is going to be very competitive, far more competitive in these games than people believe them to be. Let's see. George says the Steelers are not going to fall behind this year, going to go on long drives and score. This is a great point. It's a huge point, and it's something I probably should have brought up. I appreciate you saying this, George, because it is something that has plagued this team for years, going back to Randy Fichtner. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been one of the worst first quarter offenses, first half offenses in the National Football League. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe it was, and I think the numbers are even into this year. I think the Steelers were averaging something like 2 points in the first quarter of games. That goes all the way back. That goes all the way back to 2020, I believe. I mean, it is horrifically bad, this team early in games. And it's something I've always said ever since they got Minkah and this defense got great, which is how is it that you have a defense that is this good and they never get to play with a lead? That defense never gets, it's how often during the last 3 years when they've had this defense, has that defense played up 10 points early, up 7 points early? I mean, how often is this team going down and scoring early in football games? It just doesn't happen. So, I mean, it's a great point. It's something the Steelers have to do this year is get out fast, start fast. We're trusting in Mitch, huh? We're trusting in Mitch to put together them early drives. I hope. I mean, I hope you're right. I do think one of the things with this offense, and we'll see when Calvin gets back, but they certainly are going to have the ability this year to be more explosive. And that'll be huge. Because part of the problem for this team in years past has been that lack of explosion meant you have to do it the hard way, right? Well, you're going to just go, especially when you consider, Ben and his unwillingness to throw the ball deep and over the middle of the field. And then Matt Canada and the way he designed that offense, and Randy Fichtner as well, right? I mean, it was all short passing game stuff, easy stuff, safe stuff. You're doing it the hard way, right? You're not going to get big chunks. When I say big plays, by the way, I don't just mean like 80-yard touchdown. I mean, yeah, if George Pickens wants to go out there and score an 80-yard touchdown on the first play from scrimmage on Sunday, I'll be cool with that. But when I'm talking about big plays, I'm talking about 20-yard plays, chunk plays. How often did this team get chunk plays in years past? I think this team has to be more capable and will be more capable this year, especially with that full complement at wide receiver. Deontay and Pickens on the outside, and then Claypool in the slot. Claypool's ability from the slot to make some big plays, to get chunks his way. You guys are talking me into this. You guys are starting to talk me into this a little bit. All right. Luke says, excited to see play actions and balls over the middle of the field again. I think the play action part of this is certainly going to be a component. It was just something Ben didn't like to do. It was a part of his game that he didn't enjoy. And, what are Tomlin and Canada going to tell a guy's been in the league 18 years, like, guess what? You're going to run play action all the time now. I'll be interested to see, because they did run more of it last year than in years past, but it wasn't by a significant margin, right? I think they were still lowest in the league. Where does that number get to this year? State of the Steelers says, shouldn't the outside linebacker have more sacks than interior D lineman? That was highly rotational. I've questioned Highsmith all offseason. Okay, a couple things about Highsmith. I'd have to look the numbers up. I don't have them in front of me. I mean, I guess I could pull up the numbers here. Well, if you guys want to wait, but Highsmith was hurt a lot. So I don't know the snap counts would be interesting to see between Wormley and Highsmith. I mean, look, the sack number is a sack number. I'm more worried about the pressure number. And I mean, to the point in general, right? I mean, I think we're both in agreement that, yeah, there are certain, I think it's not a foregone conclusion that Alex Highsmith becomes a quality edge rusher for this team. The kind that this team needs if they want to go back to being a top defense in the league. Not to say that, Alex Highsmith's going to hold this team back. I'm not saying that, they can't be top 5 if Alex Highsmith doesn't get to a certain level. But obviously, this team's ability to play with a 4-man rush and get consistent pressure is going to be a huge component. And if he gets to a level, if he gets to the level we're talking about, well, then you're talking about all 4 guys are dangerous. And we're talking about TJ Watt, the best pass rusher in the National Football League. Cam Hayward, who would be considered the best interior pass rusher in the National Football League if Aaron Donald weren't in the league. He just happens to play with a generational player. That sucks. Larry Ogunjobi, great pass rusher in his own right. And then Alex Highsmith. And again, if let me put it to you this way. If Highsmith can get to Ogunjobi level, Steelers are cooking. Cooking. Luke says, if Kenny Pickett is the real deal, we're going to be real good real soon. Yes, we are. And this is why I think we start talking about 11, it's going to be 11-5 this year. They're going to win the division this year. They're going to be 10-6, yada, yada. In my eyes, like that's all cake for me. That's all bonus for me. 2022, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, no matter how good they are or how bad they are, it is a transitional period for this team. This is the transition because the Kenny Pickett era is coming, good or bad. The Kenny Pickett era is coming. But with the Kenny Pickett era comes with it, if it works, okay, then they immediately this is immediately a title contender. If Kenny Pickett, as a second-year player coming back next season, comes in and is as good as we think he can be based on what we saw in preseason, then the Steelers are going to essentially skip a step. They're going to go from, if I'm right, and they end up being like a middle-of-the-road type team, they're going to go right from that to bang contender. Well, okay, they got to fix the offensive line. But even still, they're going to be very good because there is at no level on this offense hurting for playmakers. They're at no level of this offense hurting for, but they need to solidify the running game, or they need a tight end that they can use in the passing game, or, they got to figure out the slot. No, they have Deontay locked up. Pickens is here on a rookie deal, and so is Claypool. If the future is very, very bright for the Pittsburgh Steelers if Kenny Pickett is anywhere close to what he looked like in preseason. Kenny Pickett's that guy. I don't care what happens in 22. 22 is like I said, just figure out which one of these guys on offense is the ones you want to build around. Fix the friggin' offensive line, please. And then we go right back to title contention. Guess what? The window shut for a year, right? The title window shut for a year while Ben retired, and then it reopened right back with Kenny Pickett. That's why. And again, this goes back to my excitement. Like, I think it's 7-10 this year, but I don't really care because I know that behind door number 2, behind door number 2023 is potential title contender again. Skip right over. All right, George says Lamar is not getting better, and the Steelers have figured out how to play him. The Steelers certainly have figured him out as far as limiting him from having the Lamar type games. It's just been, you look back at the history of that matchup. Yeah, Mike Tomlin, Keith Butler, that defense has done a great job of scheming around him and making him look human, certainly. By the way, what's funny about that is that the stats haven't always been great. You go back and look at the 2020 matchup, the only one they played Lamar that year. It was in Baltimore. The Steelers gave up like 250 yards in that game. But I think they, what the Steelers know about Lamar Jackson is, kind of what everybody talks about with Lamar. It's the reason why he can't win a playoff game is that, you expose yourself to Lamar enough, you make Lamar try to beat you enough. Good things are probably going to end up happening to you. If you put Lamar in enough pressure situations, enough of those money downs, probably good things are going to happen for you, not for him. And that's just been the story of his career. I know I sound like a hater saying that, but that's just been the truth. You go to that Buffalo game, that Buffalo playoff game that he lost. What was the storyline in that football game? Well, it was a really close, really tight game the entire way through. And who ended up making the biggest mistake of that football game? Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson made that. You know what I mean? Okay, that game we talked about was a 250-yard rushing performance. Who ends up making all the big mistakes of that football game? A very tight game, through and through. Who ends up making all the big mistakes in that football game? Lamar Jackson. It's just. Now, as far as is he getting better, I do think he is getting better as a passer. But I think I've said this all the time back on AFC North Talk, right? The kind of the kid glove nature that we treat Lamar with sometimes. He is getting better as a passer, but I don't like this idea that he's just as good as X quarterback. No, he's not. No, he's not. What makes him so good is his dynamism, right? He is a dynamic player. But if you took away his legs and you said, okay, drop back there and pass, are we going to live in this fantasy land? We're like, oh yeah, he's a top 5 passer. No, wrong. He is not. He is not a top 5 passer. He's getting better. But what makes him good is the fact that he's a good enough thrower and he can run, and you got to defend both at times, or all the time. All right. Awesome stuff here. It says Watson looked like butt in preseason. Yes, he did. I enjoyed seeing that. Look, there's a rust factor there. Certainly, I would love if that is actually who Watson is. If somehow, some way, he just massively regresses over the long term. Boy, would I love that. I would love. I just don't. Once again, we start entering fantasy land with things like that, and we start saying, he's never going to recover from that. I would love it. I just don't think it's realistic. Awesome stuff here. It says can't take Browns fans remotely serious. I think it's, look, they're not completely wrong because the Steelers did it. Okay. I know that sounds ridiculous, like I'm comparing the Browns to the Steelers. But let me back up for a second. Let me fix that statement. It is not impossible to do what the Browns are saying, what Browns fans are saying that they're going to do this year. It is not as though winning 6 games with the roster that they have is just absolutely 0% chance of that happening. There is a percentage chance. It is a non-zero chance of that happening. I just think that they are discounting how tough that's going to be and how the quality of opponent that they are going to have outside of week 4. And then, they're going to be relying on, that defense to stop everybody. They got to have that running game be on point. And even if all that's the case, you're still going to be playing in a game where at the end of the game, 5 minutes to go, do I trust Jacoby Brissett? I don't trust Mitch Trubisky. So do you think I trust Jacoby Brissett? No. Nope. All right, let's see what else we got here. Steve the Stewart says, I don't know if you talked about this at the beginning of the show, but how concerned am I about Deontay's shoulder? We'll do a game preview tomorrow. I'm going to preview that game in depth, talk about all the matchups and the players that are going to play and not. The nice thing about doing this show on Friday, see, we do a preview show on Wednesday of AFC North Talk, which is when the first practice report comes out. Now, in the National Football League, a lot of play is dictated by who is available, right? Because, we're talking about, great players at certain positions missing games, which can wildly change outcomes. I want to wait till Friday to do these previews because I want to know who's playing and not, right? I want to see the final practice report, then be able to get on here with you guys and talk about, okay, Deontay is playing or Deontay is not playing. It's a big deal, though. If the Steelers do not have Deontay Johnson in this game, it is a massive, massive loss for this offense because it takes away one of the biggest mismatches the Steelers had when it comes to their offense against the Bengals defense. I thought playing Deontay on the outside and Pickens on the other and putting Claypool in the slot neutralizes one of the best players on the Bengals defense. And that's a player we all know and probably we all still, at some part, we love him. Don't we miss Mike Hilton? We love Mike Hilton. I love Mike Hilton for sure. And I hate the fact that he's on the Bengals. But his playmaking ability is unquestioned. Right, his ability out there to be around the ball, to be that kind of playmaker, it's unquestioned. You put Chase Claypool out there alongside him. Okay, now he's got a real problem because that is a massive size mismatch. Massive size mismatch. To the point where if the Steelers can exploit that and the Bengals have to counter it, their counter is likely going to be to go to Trey Flowers. That's what they did a year ago when they had bigger matchups and they needed someone, who had more size. Mike Hilton comes off the field. That's a massive advantage for the Steeler team. Mike Hilton, as we all know, he is a great player, especially around the line of scrimmage, as disruptive as he can be as a blitzer in the run game, all of that. And if you get him off the field, that was one of the massive mismatches the Steelers could have created. The trickle-down effect is if Deontay doesn't play, well, then Claypool probably goes to the outside, and now you put Gunner or Sims in. Unless you want to try and have some weird matchup where Miles Boykin's going to play on the outside in certain sets, so you can move Claypool inside. But again, then you're playing yourself at some point. I think the Bengals will be happy if that happens. They go, yeah, you want to take, you want to not put one of your better slot receivers on the field so that you can try to create this weird mismatch thing. Cool. Have a Miles Boykin who's just, what will we expect from, we expect anything big from Boykin in that game? No. We're essentially playing down a receiver at some point. So Humberto says Devin Bush will play better than last year, but he's not great. I think the thing we're not talking enough about with Devin in the preseason is the fact that more often than not, he was at least in the right spot. And while it's a low bar, that's where we are with Devin. So, if he's in the right spot, it's closer than he was a year ago. George says, I've been watching Steeler football for over 60 years. This may be the worst offensive line I've seen. I mean, it's okay. It's not good. But as I went, again, I said this earlier on the show. Are we sure that that's not just kind of a reaction to how bad Dan Moore was, right? If you go back and watch those, if you have NFL Plus, go back and watch some. You can watch the shortcuts or whatever. Watch the offensive line, but just kind of ignore Dan Moore, right? You got to put a piece of tape or something on your monitor, so you just can't. You block it out. Watch everyone else. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, look, it's still not a good offensive line. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say this. Outside of Dan Moore, they're really good. But outside of Dan Moore, they're serviceable, and that's why I think. The Steelers could surprise people, especially on Sunday in this game. If they can have some success potentially running away from Dan Moore. All right, what do we got here? Amos says, I think Mitch will be better than most people think, provided the O-line isn't absolutely horrendous. I mean, again, if Mitch is, to another listener's point earlier on the show, if Mitch is better than people think, my whole theory on how does he do in those money situations won't necessarily matter as much, right? The Steelers are if he's getting out to fast starts, the Steelers are playing with leads. They could potentially win pretty, as they say. The old style points that Tomlin loves so much. All right, we are over an hour here. So I'm gonna look here and see if there are any more things we need to go over. I think we're good. All right, that'll do it for me today. Thank you all for watching and listening. Again, if you're watching this live, thank you all for watching. Leave a like on your way out. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Subscribe to the channel. Be back tomorrow night to preview this game against Cincinnati Bengals. That game coming up Sunday at 1 o'clock. Also want to let you know, you can find this show as an audio podcast, wherever you find podcasts. If you prefer it that way. And of course, you can find this on YouTube, Steeler Country with Tony Serino. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Be back tomorrow to preview Steelers Bengals right here on Steeler Country.